Hello, everybody. I am Nidhi Goyal, and this is week 4. We're in the violence module. I hope you have gone through different pieces that we've tried to bring as discussions on gender based violence. The previous years, this module was called Violence Against Women with Disabilities. But for us, in a Disability, Sexuality, Gender Rights Online Institute, it's also important to go beyond the binary, to think about gender in of itself and not just women facing violence. We're in the last section today, and we have an expert here who will talk to us about a different form of violence. Many of you may have engaged with this form of violence in through your work, may have come across through your own lives, through your lived realities. But what's also important is in today's day and age, it becomes very, very urgent to recognize this form of violence. We will be talking about online violence. What is this online violence? What have others faced? People who we work with, people who we interact with, if some of us have faced online violence, what those moments have been, what is the spectrum of violence that we can face online, what are some of the solutions, and how online can become more safe for us. We are going to have all of these discussions. You may have seen in the previous sections, in the sections with the PowerPoint, we had some case studies where there was an intersection with the kind of violence that somebody faced, and there was a component of online in it. The third section was specifically dedicated to the Me Too movement and where women with disabilities stood in that movement. And now we are here today to combine all of that knowledge, to combine all of those reflections, and to think about in this new technology, age of technology, where technology is such an integral part of our lives, right? It almost is that many a times our online and offline lives are so merged that we don't realize where one begins, where the other ends, right? And so we're here today, and I'm really, really excited to introduce Shubha Kayasta, Executive Director of Body and Data, a very strong activist from Nepal. Sorry, young and strong activist from Nepal, Shubha, who I would like to welcome here. She's done extensive work on gender rights and on the intersection of technology and gender, also on disability, sexuality, gender, and technology. So welcome here, Shubha, and I'm so glad you're here to chat with us today to take us through some of these components of what this violence looks like.
Thank you so much, Nidhi, for having me here. I'm really, really happy to be part of this institute and to share what I know about online violence and
Great.
strategies to work around it.
I'm actually very keen and very, very excited to hear some of the positive strategies because I've chatted before with you and I have been in some of the presentations that you've made before. So we'll come there, but we'll save the best for the end. I think today in this age of COVID, Shubhan, I was the specific reason why we included this for the first time in a violence module was that one which I said, excuse me, one which I said that, you know, our lives are so enmeshed, we really can't say this is our online life and this is our offline life. But also second, because everybody's so excited about having technology, saying, okay, the digital world has made our lives whatever it could have been made easy in this current time of crisis. The whole idea is that um, digital spaces have made it easy for us. If we look at even statements from UN Women or their agenda, activists, women's rights groups, technology rights groups, etc., there is more than ever an urgent need to recognize what is violence in the online space because we're somehow inviting this online space into our homes in a very different way through working from home. We are inviting this online space into our relationships in a very different way. We're inviting it in our recreation in a more stronger way now. I thought, Shubha, we could chat through some examples, and I wanted to actually bring one of the cases that we've discussed in this module, in this week, um, earlier in one of the sections, and I just thought we could start with what is this online violence and what are the forms within this online violence, right? So we always say offline has harassment, it has physical abuse, it has verbal abuse, it has all of that, but what all can constitute online violence? And I thought if we could break down some of the cases and really think what forms the violence is taking there, and you could take us some of that through some of that, so I could bring the cases and you could sort of unpack it a bit for us. Would that be okay?
That sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So for gender-based violence, Shiva, we've been talking about different case studies of women sharing the multi-layered ideas of domestic violence and so on and so forth. We have in this module and earlier a case study of an autistic gay person, as he calls himself. And he basically saw some wacky, fun videos with some effects that people make, just for fun. And he decided to put up one of such videos on his Facebook wall. He did not realize that there are privacy settings and you could only make it to friends only. And he basically, some bullies of his school, high school, took that video down, downloaded it, and uploaded it to YouTube. And from then, he experienced a lot of name calling around his disability. People called him a retard, and used other offensive terms in his physical life. So when he went to high school, the next day and the coming weeks, he was bullied a lot. There was a lot of name calling. There was a lot of public humiliation on the um, just comments and things on the YouTube video. Could you tell us what went wrong here, and
Mm-hmm.
really what are these kinds of behaviors that were perpetrated or meted out to him?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that case study. I mean, also, even before the era of internet, technology has enabled certain kind of violence around us, right? Like when I was in school, like our phone numbers would be passed around among among boys, or like among people that we didn't
Right.
consent to share our phone numbers with, and we would get prank calls at home. All right, like
Right.
all these kind of violence are interlinked, and how, like you also mentioned earlier, offline is linked to online, and online is linked to offline, and we can talk about this even further. But the case that you mentioned here, it does speak a different layers of violation that has happened on this person, right? First, definitely they had shared a video online on their own Facebook page, but when someone else goes and then download this video without their consent, that is a violence on itself. And then reproducing it, uploading it on YouTube channel without letting them know, without their own agency of how they want to be portrayed. The video is online, and now if this person is getting more hate speech or more, uh, hateful comments online, being called names, that is now hate speech, and also kind of like trolling, if I can say. If trolling would be something, when people are being attacked for their identity, and usually it could be comment, or it could be post related to this person. So I would say there are like number of violation that has taken place on this person. And like you were mentioning earlier, very correctly, how online violence is not seen as something that is harmful. In our context, people usually speak about it and usually simplify it, saying that, oh, it's in the internet. Why are you so worried about it? It's only in the internet, right? But at the same time, how we were saying earlier, how online and offline is very much linked. One is definitely because the online space is just the representation of our online lives. So in our day-to-day life, we see a lot of homophobia, ableist notions, a lot of misogyny, transphobia. That exactly gets down to online spaces, and people's rights are violated. And how it affects our online, offline life is, we have seen so many cases where, for example, an information of a person gets leaked online, and they go through a lot of mental stress, pressure. There has been incidents where people have tried committing suicide. People might lose job. So there are implications in our real life, given how our information gets disseminated online. And if it's not with our consent, that's like another level of violation altogether.
Right. And this is so interesting because you bring up so many important things already in unpacking this, saying that the trivializing of online violence, right? The whole that don't give it enough weightage because it is online is something that so many people face. They're like, oh, just switch off the computer, just block the person. It's totally okay, it's fine. Why are you overreacting? And I think some of this is the problem. But I think where it stems from, we're talking about shift of mindsets within societies. We're talking about shift of attitudes, thought processes, breaking down of patriarchy, different kinds of power structure. And I think this really demonstrates the stronger hold of those power structures and mimics the offline spaces. So really, and where it starts from is not even the comments and the hate speech, as you called it, right? It really starts from violating the consent, and what this consent looks like. And are we not finding the same thing? There are many people who either share photographs, very, very personal photographs between two people. They may be partners or not, it really doesn't matter. But, in intimate photographs, intimate voice notes, intimate videos just get shared. And we've seen this so much in before in all over the world, actually, not just in India or in South Asia. So just some of that, I think violation of that consent and starting from there. But on the point of trolling, which you said is a um, targeted attack, right? And we've seen that a lot in our feminist movements. So if you see one of the articles that I was reading, and we all know that generally people having stronger voices, and when women have stronger voices when they're not supposed to have a voice,
Hmm.
people with disabilities are supposed to generally either be very accepting of the kind of behavior that's meted out to them, or should not have a choice, voice, any of those things. So when they exercise their right to speak up or right to have a thought or a choice, we've often seen that they're targeted in different ways, right? And I'll come to two case studies that come out for me around this trolling or targeted attack. One of them is women, particularly with either psychosocial disabilities or intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities. If any of those speak their mind out, and which is, particularly in the political or any other arena, which is not in sync with the common larger public view, right? Immediately, their opinions are either dismissed by saying that they are mad, quote unquote, or they're crazy, quote unquote, or they're attacked for needing either supported decision making or having come out before in public that they live with either a psychosocial disability or any of these other disabilities. Um, have you come across in the queer spaces also things like this where your identity is attacked because you have a different opinion, and it's nothing to do with your identity? So you're not even saying that, oh, people with psychosocial disabilities should have equal rights. You're actually expressing a view on a totally different subject, and there to target you, the disability is used. So it'll be great to know examples maybe from the queer movement or from the women's rights movement where such things were done.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are seeing more and more of these kind of violence, right? And I think it's not just because the internet rate is increasing, because people usually would talk about, oh, because now there is access to internet and there is access to mobile phones, that is why these kind of violence are increasing. But these kind of violence always have existed in our society, and then we're just seeing the representation online, like I was saying earlier. And the narrative of, oh, because there is phone now, smartphones and internet, and that is why the increase in violence, is actually very problematic. And sometimes our laws and regulations and even our society, they use these kind of narrative to not provide now access to internet and technology
Technology.
to our young girls, right? And there are
Right.
like,
Right.
for Nepal at least, and a lot of South Asian countries, what I have read is, they would associate child violence with access to internet,
That's it.
or like child
Yes.
marriage to access to internet, and then they would not provide them with smartphones. And that is
Sorry.
actually um, a restriction, and also the violation of their right to information, their right to assembly and association. In terms of some of the examples and cases that we have come across in the course of our work at Body and Data, is there, even if there is no, like, it need not be between a couple or a pair, but if, let's say, there is a trans person who is a minor, now they are, I think, almost 18. So they were quite popular, like, since last year. They would put their videos online on TikTok, expressing themselves through dance, through different kind of feminine attributes, where they are male assigned at birth person. I don't know how they identify themselves. I only know them in an online persona. But they got trolled really badly just because they were not adhering to the gender representation of the gender that they were born, right? And they would get a lot of hateful speech. People would say like really nasty comments about them just because they were actually expressing themselves beyond what is acceptable in our gender binary notion. And also,
Right.
I don't know if you have come across or if you have heard of all this Zoom bombing that happened recently
Yes.
after
Yes.
since the
Right.
COVID. So one of the event that we were facilitating on the day against queer phobia, we got Zoom bombed. And we were just around
Wow.
30 queer folks gathered to talk about our thing, right? To just listen to some music, to basically talk about what is going on in our life. But we using online space was not
Mm.
accepted, let's say. So some of the people
Mm.
room
Mm.
bombed our space. They bombarded us with some porn videos, and they left. So this shows how
Wow.
the space is, though there are spaces, it is also not very conducive. And there are also those kind
Mm.
of
Mm.
forces that don't like us there, right? In these kind of spaces.
Right.
And
Right.
I was just reading this news today morning from India.
Mm.
A list of people who goes to gay club with their names, with their personal detail, was
Mm.
leaked by a television channel in a
Mm.
website.
Mm.
So, this again would bring these people who are gay, might not be open that they are gay in public, now are facing a lot of challenge. Sometimes
Right.
people are not open to their family, so they might feel a lot of violation and violence there. There is a risk of losing jobs. And in the
Right.
same news, there was a mention that someone tried committing suicide as well,
Right. You
because
mentioned.
this is the big violence, right?
Right.
Something about me is released online without my consent, and that might
Right.
put me at further risk. So these things keeps happening all around us,
And
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 yeah.
such a violence keeps coming back to you, right? The video keeps circulating and circulating and circulating. It's not. it's not just the trauma that you relive, you're actually reliving that violence. Like you keep seeing it, right? Again and again in proof in a very tangible way. So it's extremely important to see. And also just that also allows me this space of, sharing what happened in the first case that I shared about the autistic gay person. He said, I got so trolled and bullied online and offline for my autism that totally impacted my outing process. I was so scared to out myself, so I did not out myself for years, right? That already this attracts so much of bullying and violence. So the impact is so strong, and I think that's the whole intent of the violence, right? Violence always stems from power and patriarchy, and where the intent of violence is that you should be silenced. I think the whole idea is that, and that's why men often take offense saying, but we also get harassed online. And that's not a denial that men, cisgender men don't get harassed, or just men, heterosexual men don't get harassed. It's the idea is that when it's a woman being harassed, or when that's a queer people, the harassment or the bullying or the trolling immediately becomes of a sexualized nature, right? Like as soon as you want to silence a woman or you don't like her opinions, you will start giving her, putting out rape threats online. And
Yes.
people are like, yeah, but they're online rape threats. Nobody does anything. Again, you go back to square one, right? Oh, just delete that comment, or just, just do whatever. It's as
Yeah.
simple as that. And the Zoom bombing is the
Yeah.
latest thing that we really came up to this, where the Zoom bombing has left an impact. But I wanted to actually share very recent incident that has happened with me here, to bring all of these, consolidate all of the forms of violence, and move slowly into what could be some of our solutions, right? Like I am an activist. I've already worked in these spaces, from gender, sexuality, violence, technology, all of that, right? So it's I knew everything intellectually what to do, but still there was a circle of support that I had to build, and people had to tell me what to do. And I was doing some of them, I wasn't doing some of them. It was, I was sure that I will cope with this because I wanted to. The issue was very dear to me. But this is what we've been seeing. In Me Too cases, right? That happens to women, and similar thing happened. As an activist, I outed a man who was harassing women with disabilities, who had been harassing women with disabilities. And this was someone from the disability community. And I received, can I please ask others to pause, to mute themselves?
Uh, yes. Also, I'm switching now to Mimi.
Okay.
I'm turning up my video.
Hi, Minnie, do we have you on?
Yeah, she's on, Nidhi.
Perfect. Great.
And Pradeep has pinned her. Yeah, so we can continue.
Great. Okay. So I am now going to speak about the Me Too movement, where a lot of women faced a consolidation of all what we have been discussing, and share a case that happened to me recently. And I, as a woman with a disability, as an activist, I outed someone who was harassing other women with disabilities, and they are from the disability community, someone very well known, etc. And suddenly, and I did this on a listserv, and suddenly there was a lot of backlash that came on the listserv. Slowly, there was a lot of support, also a lot more support in the numbers. But support doesn't, how do you say, cancel out the backlash, right? And this backlash continued for a while, and it was so. Now from a distance of a month or so, I can tell you that it looks like such a well-woven online and offline combination, because while I was receiving backlash on the e-list, there were telephone calls going around to create offline pressure for me to withdraw the statement, to give a public apology. And it went into a space where on Facebook, I was publicly, they tried to defame me as a feminist. So they questioned my feminism and my work ethic, and said that I wasn't really, there are many women who file false harassment complaints, and so I was one of them. And this was not even a complaint. I hadn't even outed my own harassment story. So there was a distance from the trauma, right, of harassment. I don't know if you understand what I mean. If I had experienced the trauma of that harassment firsthand and I was going through this, I'm sure the experience would have been another level of distasteful and traumatic. But it was also very interesting because the stronger you are, and finally the trolling stopped because one man with a disability said that if you're trolling such strong women, you're giving the message to other women that you cannot speak up at all. And so much of backlash. How many women are going to be able to report harassment and abuse and face this level of backlash? So my two questions to you are one longer than the other. My first short question is that what is your, just as a disabled activist, activist working on queer rights, disability rights, etc. Shubha, just what's your take on all the women or the way in the Me Too movement and other such movements and campaigns when we're trying to claim our rights, uh, the kind of trolling and online violence that's meted out. What's your take on that? What do you have to share about that? Your thoughts, experiences, etc. And then I want to dive into this whole segment of what are the ways of coping with this entire spectrum of violence that we discussed, ranging from trolling to bullying to hate speech to Zoom bombings and other pieces, if I'm forgetting right now to summarize.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, Nidhi. And when we are talking about online violence, one of the important thing to remember is this is not in isolation. It is linked to other different things around in our society. It is linked to the patriarchal state, right? Because most of our states are patriarchal. They are hierarchical in terms of who holds more power and who doesn't. And the other factor that comes into play here are the social media platforms or the tech companies where these violations are taking place. And sometimes they can actually minimize the violence, but they would not. So violence as a violence, but also linking that to state, linking that to our societal patriarchal structure, different institution, as well as these social media platforms. And whenever it comes to specifically person with disability, other marginalized group like queer folks, there is a lot of monitoring that happens on our bodies. There is always constant surveillance that takes place, especially, if you are from marginalized community, if you are an activist who are speaking against certain kind of powerful forces. Um, they are trying to see what you are doing. And when it comes to disabled person, there is always this protectionist lens. There might be overprotection, right, from the guardian, from the parents. If they are queer people, their gender expression and sexual expressions are always monitored. So what happens is when we are doing something online, we are constantly in this gaze of the ones who have more power to us. Could be people from our family, could be from the state, and the status quo, the
Hello?
hello.
Yeah.
I don't know where did I got disconnected.
No, the status quo. You were right there.
Yeah, you're fine.
So whenever we are questioning the status quo, there are a lot of challenges that comes to us. And one is the online violence that is visible to us right in front of us, right? And especially, like you were mentioning earlier, whenever a woman is trying to say something online, a lot of bashing and trolling and harassment comes in the form of slut shaming, talking about her body, talking about how she looks like, some group or not. Whereas usually for cisgender heterosexual men, it is usually about their brain and how they could be stupid, or like the type of harassment or trolling that they get are different. And that is why a lot of people online would leave these spaces because the trolling and harassment and hate speech becomes too much to bear, right? And sometimes we also switch off, which is good at times, but sometimes this becomes a permanent thing. People would not just engage online because there's a lot of trauma and there's a lot of things that you have to bear. Um, and I forgot your second question actually.
No, this was, I was just taking it into this whole what should people do, right? Like
Okay,
some of
yeah,
the
the
steps
tips.
that we should take, and really,
Mm-hmm.
just adding to one thing which we've very briefly touched on rape threats, but if you combine that with non-consensual sharing of contact details, right? So it
Yeah,
doesn't remain platform specific. For example, when I outed someone on listserv, I immediately in an hour or 2 hours got a threat on my WhatsApp, which is my mobile number and WhatsApp, right? Um, which is quite
yeah,
public, but
it
also
is.
it's just this whole combination, right? And if you're an activist and you're working with the community generally, many members would have the numbers, but which also means that there were multiple levels of violations, like you said. So it doesn't remain even platform specific. If you express your view on Twitter, it doesn't remain Twitter specific. There's also a lot of online stalking, right? And then you go into all the platforms that the person occupies and ensure that you troll them, or you bring them to such a point that they, I've seen activists or people or women quit Facebook altogether, quit Twitter altogether, take a whole detox break, and that level of it comes to that level, right? So just not just online and offline are woven so closely, but different online spaces are also so closely woven, and the different forms of violence are also so closely woven. So what can one do? What are the solutions? We know all of these violence. First, we wanted to understand what are the
Yeah,
different forms and what do we interact with in our daily lives. If we can quickly come to Shubha discussing what are the different steps that one could take.
sure. So I'm referring to this document that was produced by Take Back the Tech. It has
Mm-hmm.
some basic, like really, really simple tips on what one can do when they
Mm-hmm.
are attacked online. And this
Right.
might not be, there might be different strategies. You can do one thing or the other. And whenever it comes to measures like these, no size fits all, right? Like this is
Right.
security tools and tips. It might depend on where we are, our circumstances, our national laws and regulation, and also our state of mind. But anyway, I have
Right.
like few tips here that might be useful. You can combine one, you can combine one or many at the same time.
Right.
And I'll probably go one by one quickly. So first thing I think, which is really, really important to know and realize, that whenever an online violence takes place against us, it is not our fault, right? And usually a lot of people, especially women and feminists, we happen to go into this spiral of self-blame.
Why did you do this? Others also
Yeah.
bring that
and
in, right?
and I
Saying,
should not
why did
have
you do
done
this?
that, right? A lot
Yeah.
of guilt and shame.
Right.
So definitely it's not our fault. And the second thing is, we are not the first person. There are lots of people who have had gone through this, who have had gone through similar issues, and who have had self-doubt. So to remember that and to realize is for most important. The second tip here I would want to bring is identifying what is happening, because sometimes when a violation takes place in our bodies, in our mind, in the spaces that we are in,
Hmm.
there's a lot to take. So
Hmm.
it might also be useful to understand what is happening. For example, if my photos are leaked online. So what is
Hmm.
that, right? Was it consensual? What is not consensual? Was my account hacked? And that is how the photo got leaked. Had I sent my phone to repair, and that is how the repairing shop had leaked my photo. So
Hmm.
trying to map like what happened and how would
Hmm.
be a good thing, a second step.
Hmm.
Then another definitely important thing to do is to take screenshot and to take screen recording. This is basically to collect a lot of evidence that might be useful in later stage. Sometimes what happens is, when we are attacked online, if we are bombarded with hate speech or a nasty message, we just delete it, thinking because it's just too much to handle. So
Yeah.
the first reaction is to delete. But we can take screenshots, and this is also helpful if we are to go for legal procedure in future. Then the other thing to remember is to respond together. right? To call out friends, to call out, to like actually reach out to friends and family to see like this is happening to me, and to realize that, you know, how it is hampering my emotional health. And if we are to respond to the attacker, if we are to report the attacker, having set of friends and allies or family members to help us with the process is great.
Mm.
And something that I think a lot of people do, but we have to do this even more, is to report the in the platform itself. For example, the
Mm.
case that you were mentioning earlier of a video of autistic boy that got leaked on YouTube, right, without their consent. We could report to YouTube itself saying that this video
Right.
was uploaded without consent of this particular individual. And there are
Right.
reporting mechanism in all the social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit. So different pages have different way of mechanism of reporting, and
Can I
that's
ask you a
usually.
question here? Sorry.
Mhm, sure.
Interrupting, but I just to add to this immediately, where can you find all of this? Like, if I'm on Facebook, where can I
Hmm.
go and see how to report, or
Yeah,
what is the yeah?
yeah. So if it's on Facebook, if it's a photo that you want to report in the Facebook interface, wherever the photo is, right below that, I think on the right corner, because I don't use Facebook, I can't remember. There would
No, no,
be
just share me.
there would be a place where you can actually click, and then there would be different options, and you can actually report the photo or the content.
Correct. Correct.
And same with Twitter. You can
Right.
actually look at the each post and then
Mm.
report. And sometime you can also report an account if you are being bothered by a particular account.
Right.
The difficult part here is the platform, whether or not they respond. Because sometimes what has happened, even to me, is I have gotten really like hateful speech against me for saying something a couple of times. And when I would try to report these profiles and account, the notification I would get from Twitter is, if you don't like the messages, just block the account or mute the account. So it
Right.
means they are not taking the responsibility of what is happening in their platform, but basically putting everything on your shoulder, right? So also these mechanisms that are there in place are not exactly very favorable. That is what I wanted to highlight.
Mm.
The other tip that we can do and definitely have to be done is to change password, because if we think our privacy has been
Compromise.
compromise, our
Mm.
password has been stolen, to change it right away. It could be for our devices, for our social media platform, right? Like where. So changing the password, storing them in a proper way is another mechanism. And there are tips and tools to remember difficult password. There are password managers that we can use. And another thing to remember is to take a break, because sometimes dealing with all the trolls and harassment
Mm.
is a lot. It's a lot to take. So to take a break, to go off social media, to deactivate account, to turn off notification is something we can do and is in our reach. So definitely taking a break, and reporting to the authority. But again, this would depend on our legal system
Laws.
in the
Mm.
country.
Mm.
Most of
And
our
pace
countries.
of justice.
Exactly. And most of our countries might have regulations around gender based violence, domestic violence. But when it comes to online violence, they don't think it's a crime. Or, you know, like the mechanism that we have set, especially in our kind of countries, are again not really favorable of the victim or survivor. But anyway, reporting is another thing we could do definitely.
Right.
And
That
at the
also takes
end,
us. Sorry.
yeah,
Sorry.
and at the end, like even, you know, when we are going through all the trolls, harassment, hate speech, the most important thing to remember is that's not the end of the world, right? Like these things happens, and there's like life more than this. Sometimes there is like no way out when we are in certain situation. Let's say if my photos is leaked, if my sexual videos are uploaded on porn site and I'm never able to take them down, but also realizing that that's not me, that doesn't define me. And then those who did violation on my right, those who uploaded those videos, are the one who should be suffering and not me. So also that is something we can remember, definitely. So yeah, these are the few things I bring in here as tips.
I do also want to add, as someone who's survived online violence, as a survivor, that if you take a break from social media, do not think it's a defeat, right? I think that that advice and the way you build a narrative around it in your own head, you take a break as you want. But also, trolling can become a space where it causes great anxiety. You're checking your phones or your laptops or the social media platforms in every couple of minutes to see what next shot in your face, right? So it's a very tricky balance between taking a break, feeling like you've lost, or this. So you have to know that you haven't lost. You have to know it's not your fault, and that's how you will emerge. And it doesn't mean, maybe you don't interact with that post for a while, but then you interact on the platform. Or maybe you just feel like your trauma, you want to deal with the trauma and come back. Take a break from the platform. No,
Yeah, absolutely. And
perpetrators don't
sometimes
win. It's not a win
even
of the perpetrators, is what I want to definitely emphasize.
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes even to take screenshot or like whatever I mentioned earlier is so difficult because we have to go back and read all those things. In these kind of circumstances, then we can reach out for help, giving our password to someone trusted and asking them to turn off notification, like take screenshot or all the evidence that is required so that we don't go through that stress again, and we have
Right.
someone to help us with in that difficult
Right.
circumstances.
Perfect. Just thank you so much, Shubha. I think this was a fantastic chat with you. Just the whole understanding what are the different forms of violence in the online spaces, how our online lives and offline lives are linked so closely, really to think through what we could do as different steps. Thanks a lot for all of this.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm pausing here, Shubha. Can we do the pause? Because we're already 30 minutes into this video, people are going to stop listening to us. Okay, I'm going to start it now. Okay, Shubha, before we leave, I know we've spoken about your intimate videos being leaked, your photos being leaked. People are really having a tough time with everything. But, something that we don't speak about in this pandemic is managing your sexual desires and sexual relationships when you're in a lockdown, when you're living with 10 people in the family, or, so on and so forth with all the restrictions. But the biggest fear, one of the biggest fears, is this digital connect and expressing sexuality online, right? Is it safe? What can be the tips? This confusion about this platform is not safe, that platform is safe. Can you as a technologist, as an activist, give us some tips of what platforms work, what can be done, and just really, if I had to say, for safer sexting, what could really work?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nidhi. That's such an important discussion we need to have, because sometimes when we talk about violence and the implication of it in our bodies and in our movement, we sometimes forget to talk about other beneficial things, right? Like exploring ourselves online, our sexuality, and expressing them. And that is the power that we can use using the internet. That is somewhere we can change the discourse from being this violence centric to pleasure centric. And I guess you might have spoken a lot about that in the course itself as well. I have a few tips here about how to do safer sexting, right? And I'm gonna share this PowerPoint with you later. So there's like detailed discussion here. I think first and the foremost thing is to have an agreement with your sexting partner. Like, how are you gonna sext? Are you going to keep the photos or videos later on after the sexting session? So having a conversation, having an agreement between partner or partners is the first thing. And to remember that things might get leaked. So not just from the person that you are sending the photos or the clips or videos, but somewhere in between as well. It could be the messaging apps that you're using. It could be, getting hacked by someone else. So there are different ways. Like I was saying earlier, you can take your phone for repairing with their photos on it, and that might go out. So one of the things you can definitely do is to cover your face if you want to. And you can cover your face by, a cloth, or you can also blurry your face, pixelate the face. And there are certain apps like Pixlr, Pixlr, that can be used to blur your face or tattoo or your birthmarks. So in that way, you are securing yourself at least in one step. The other thing is also to delete your, let's say, metadata or geotag. So metadata means data within your photos, data within data. So a photo might have information of, where it was taken, or what is the size of the photo. So you could also delete all those kind of small information from your content using apps like EXIF, EXIF editor. The other thing is also using a secure way of communicating. So to use secure apps, for example, Signal, Telegram, these are the few that are secure so far, right? That is what I can say. And apps like WhatsApp or Viber, they are not secure according to security expert. They say they're encrypted, but we don't know yet. So my suggestion is not to use any random apps.
And what about Zoom or Google Meet?
No, Google Meet is from
They're
Google.
not in the super secure.
Yeah, so we can't trust them. I mean, it could be
Yeah.
secure in a way, but
We don't know it's not.
you don't know
Yeah,
it's
okay.
secure. Yeah, so to use a secure way. And with the benefit of apps like Signal, Telegram, Wire is you can have a timer set. For example, you can have 30 seconds or 1 minute timer set. You send a photo, and then in a minute it will get deleted on its own. And in certain app, you can also know if the screenshot has been taken. So that is also another layer of protecting your content. Like if someone take the screenshots, you're notified. And definitely having a secure password for different account and different devices, and not just using the same password for everything, right? Like that's the basic rule. And then the last tip would be to understand how to delete the photos, how to save if we want to save the photos. So basically knowing the basic mechanism of how our gallery works, how our photos get saved, and where does it get
Cloud
saved.
works.
Sometimes when you send it over an app, it also saves in the app. You can also not have that option. So there are ways to play around it. And usually these kind of suggestions are also on YouTube, if that's useful. There are a lot of online material that you can search, that you can use to find settings and other secure measures.
Right. Thank you so much, Shubha. I think all of these tips to measures to safeguard yourself, it's not really in your sexual and intimate relationships and lives and while expressing your sexuality. I think very confidential information, digital information on your passwords, information on your finances, having a conversation which generally is just of a secure nature, right? I think these tips are so helpful in all of those, and to understand if we're using certain platforms, or to understand which platforms as yet are secure, and we're really, where are we okay exposing ourselves, in which ways, and sometimes we don't think about. Just by being ignorant, we don't think about this. So thank you so much for taking us through all of this, Shubha. Thank you for all the discussion that we've had and for all your tips. We also want to thank you for the PowerPoint presentation, and for all the participants. We'll be sharing the presentation that Shubha has made for us as a quick reference guide. So thank you for that as well, Shubha, and just everyone stay safe. Consent, autonomy, agency, everything exists in the online world. And it's time that we recognize, we become more conscious, and we take action when they're violated. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi. Thank you so much.